Up until recently, with manga and anime as a whole, we've seen that there's been a clear distinction between shonen and seinen, between the lighthearted, happy-go-lucky, usually upbeat shonen manga and anime versus the usually darker toned, deeper themed, and maybe a little bit gorier seinen anime. Say you compare something like Berserk to something like Naruto, something like Attack on Titan to something like One Piece, and you can clearly see the distinction. This is not a debate on which one is better or if one medium is better than the other. This video is going into how Chainsaw Man sees the distinction between seinen and shonen and decided to meld them together, making a perfect blend of these two genres, these two types of manga, making something that I think is very interesting because it may set a precedent for anime and manga moving forward. This is a video about Chainsaw Man. Now, before I get into the review of Chainsaw Man as a whole and get into what I really think is what makes it special, which is really the blend between shonen and seinen, I do need to just get you guys up to speed on what Chainsaw Man is in general. First of all, this manga is about 68 chapters in already, so while it isn't just beginning, right, I'm not the first one to notice, hey, Chainsaw Man is good, it is a still fairly new manga that I think deserves as much love and support as you'll give it, as you'll see in this video. Chainsaw Man essentially starts with the main character, Denji, being impoverished. At this point in time, he's able to just barely make ends meet by killing devils. Now, devils is something that's a little bit complicated to get into, right? Essentially, what I'd equate devils to is just these monsters that have specific abilities. Now, Denji is able to kill these monsters, or these devils, by using a devil of his own, Pochita, who basically helps him throughout his endeavors. And towards the end of the chapter, kind of spoiler alert for the first chapter, but it's not that big of a deal, Denji dies and his devil fuses with him in order to make him Chainsaw Man. Now, and then the rest of the manga just goes into, well, a little bit of some interesting things with Denji. Denji gets saved by this girl named Makima, who he becomes infatuated with literally immediately, and it kind of just goes on from there. I don't want to spoil too much of the plot or the story because I do think it takes some really interesting turns, and I do think that it's very intriguing and it's something you should read for yourself. But I'll more get into what I think makes it special rather than just the plot synopsis now. The first thing that I think really stood out to me about Chainsaw Man as a whole is its main character, Denji, who I mentioned in the synopsis. Now, Denji is a very interesting character to me because, to me, he seems like someone who's it's a very interesting choice of a main character, right? I think he's very unique as a main character for the sole reason that he seems almost hyper-realistic of what a 16-year-old teenager would be, right? You just have to read the manga. Like, you'd literally be able to read the first chapter and hear about his goals of dreams of literally just getting a girl, getting money, and living in a nice house, and you'd kind of get the feeling that this Denji character is pretty relatable to probably its core audience, like the shonen genre, which I will get into in a little bit. Now, Denji's motivations throughout this manga is relatively simple. He doesn't have some super high overarching goal like becoming Hokage, killing his best friend, or maybe becoming a hunter, or anything that you would usually see in the shonen genre, right? It's something that's relatively simple in comparison to a lot of other things, right? To me, it's something that most teenagers would probably have problems with, or at least have goals to dealing with, and that's just he trying to chase a bag and get the girl who saved him, and that is super hot to him. So, I mean, pretty relatable motivations, and I think that helps you connect to him if you're around that age, or if you can at least relate to those same feelings. And I think that does make Denji an especially cool main character, right? His personality is goofy, but it's not over the top in any way. He's not overly serious like I think a lot of seinen main characters would be. I'm looking at you, Guts. But he's not overly goofy or overly like dramatic and bombastic in the same way that, say, like someone like Naruto or Gon would be. No shade to any of the characters mentioned, just bringing up the fact that I think Denji more sits in the middle in terms of his relatability. Like, he seems more like a human person. Like, I've never met a person in my life who acts like Naruto, right? But I have met people in my life that act like Denji. Those are essentially And for all the people that don't understand what type of character Denji is, he would be classified as a simp nowadays. Now, would I say that? Yes, because he's literally willing to risk his life for a girl, right? Now, is that a bad thing? I mean, that's up for you to decide. I think it's funny because it leads to a lot of, like, really funny things, right? Like, Denji seems to be, like, his own comedy relief character, which I find pretty interesting. Like, in these dire, tense situations, Denji's reactions to things, I always find funny and humorous. It's not that, like, overly, the way I would describe it, right, is, you know, if you've watched anime or read manga, those, like, overly dramatic scenes where, like, someone, like, gets surprised to something, or they get hit by this, like, female character, right? It's just this, like, weird comedy. I think Denji just, his comedy has actually made me, like, chuckle while reading the manga, which I think is very impressive, since that's not something I feel usually unless I'm literally reading a comedy-focused manga, right? So I do think that Denji as a main character is just very cool, and he does his job well as being relatable, being funny, but being able to get slightly serious when he needs to be, right? So I do think that that kind of acts all in his favor. Now, here's kind of the part where I really get to the main thesis of the video, right? How does Chainsaw Man perfectly blend the shonen and seinen genres together? Why am I hyping that up so much, right? Why am I like saying that, oh yeah, this is the perfect blend and this is going to start setting precedents in the shonen or just the manga industry in general, right? And I'll get to that right now, actually. The main reason I think it is it blends the lighthearted moments, right, of shonen. It blends the triumphant moments. It blends the fun, the joyous moments, right, the more lighthearted tone, right, of shonen. But it also blends some of the best parts of seinen in as well, whether that be the massive amounts of gore that it has within Chainsaw Man. I'm trying now, the manga panels that will be going past as I've been talking throughout this video will just be like the most watered down versions of these like manga panels, and like just basically be the least violent action scenes that I could find, simply because I don't want this video to be completely demonetized, which is probably inevitable for a Chainsaw Man review, but that's whatever, right? I will show a couple of panels of just how bloody and gory this can get, and personally I think that's something that shonen can benefit from, right, if it benefits to the general tone, right, which in Chainsaw Man I think it does. The tone seems to be very, like, while I said the tone is happy-go-lucky and it's more shonen-like, Chainsaw Man does know how to switch a flip, like, get really depressing sometimes, and it's very interesting the way it switches from a lighthearted moment or a moment that shouldn't really mean anything to the viewer to something that had generally made me, like, sad and think about my life for like a good few days after reading that chapter. I won't spoil it, I'll just go general. There's a moment between Makima, who's the character that Denji's in love with, and Denji where they're watching movies, and basically Denji's wondering if he still has a heart even after he's become a devil man, or half devil, half Denji. And it just, the scene between them and the interaction between them was really heartwarming, and it was especially weird because, like, I had grown attached to these characters in a fun way, but then they hit you with the emotions, right? They hit you with the feels and that mini depression that you get sometimes in anime. Like, death scenes give you, that's kind of the feeling that this specific scene gives, and it does kind of hint that every once in a while, right? It gives those little drops of like, you know, feelings and emotions, right, that I think seinen is very good at bringing out, like those deeper and those darker tones, right? So not only do I think it blends, like, because I think shonen is more accessible to most people, right? It's more friendly to the average viewer than I would say most seinen are, right? Because if you don't know, Berserk is something else in terms of its gore, in terms of its themes, in terms of its nihilism, its nihilistic outview on the world, right? Once again, no shot towards Berserk. I'm just saying that I don't think it's necessarily as viewer-friendly, like to most viewers, I would say, as something like Naruto, One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, Bleach, like those things like that are much more lighthearted, right? I think that Chainsaw Man reels you in with the shonen-like appeal with extra gore, but then after it has you in and it has you really attached to these characters, it definitely can hit you in the feeling sometimes, which I think is very, very special. I think Chainsaw Man is something that what has been talked about on YouTube is definitely underrated in general, right? So I hope that this video, hope that my placement being somewhat low in the anime community can kind of boost more of you guys. I hope you guys, you know, enjoy this and kind of get inspired to read, I say, Chainsaw Man, because it is a really good manga, right? But this would not be a complete manga review if I did not go over some of the criticisms that I've had while reading it and some of the things that I've noticed, okay? Now, even though I love Chainsaw Man and I've spent probably like the last 10 minutes thinking about and talking about Chainsaw Man in general, right? I've reread the manga at least twice before making this video just because of how much I enjoyed it, how much I enjoyed the overall tone and just the manga in general. But it's really just one main criticism that I have. There are some very like superficial nitpicky things that you could get into that don't bother me, right? So I won't bring them up if they didn't personally bother me as a reader of Chainsaw Man. The main thing that I would say that kind of did bring me out of the action a little bit was, well, the action and the art sometimes. Let me explain. I'll show you a few panels of just things that did kind of throw me off, right? You'll see, for example, that the same like action shot is used every single time like he enters his chainsaw form, right? Which is fine. I understand, like, okay, for example, Naruto uses the Shadow Clone Jutsu all the time and he uses the same pose. That's fine, I understand. But I do think that it gets not lazy, right? Because trust me, reusing the same drawings in order to speed up the process, I don't think is lazy, right? Especially as someone who's trying to aspire to make a manga themselves. I don't think it's lazy. I just do think that it generally sometimes takes me out of the moment, right? And it's also some of the dynamic posing that the mangaka does use within this manga sometimes, right? For example, these highly like important action sequences sometimes have these very basic poses, these very basic camera angles as well, right? And once again, no shot towards the mangaka, but I do think that these sometimes bring me out of the moment. Along with the art quality, sometimes, like with the rest of these things, right? It's not, like, I'll just tell you this right now. It's not the One Punch Man webcomic level by any stretch of the imagination, right? It is decent art, right? But don't go into this manga, or don't walk into this manga expecting Berserk, Vagabond, or like really any high level art that you've seen in manga. Like, don't read it with that expectation, right? It's just gonna disappoint you if you expect that from it, right? The one thing I would say it hasn't mastered from the seinen genre is probably the higher level of art quality, but so far it also hasn't mastered the art of going on hiatus. So I guess it's a win-win there. little shot at you Berserk fans, but I guess Hunter x Hunter's on hiatus too, and oh god. Anyways, moving on. Basically, yeah, I would say that's my main point. Like, my main gripes with it is just the art and like sometimes the action sequences. That's about it. Like, that's like it. Unironically, like, I don't find many other problems with Chainsaw Man. Do I think it's perfect? No, right? Obviously, I've outlined like a few of my superficial, like, kind of like baseline problems with it, right? I don't think it does everything as well as like every shonen and every seinen. I think this is the first step, and a pretty good step, to like actually merging what seinen and shonen is. And the only thing that I think handles it better, handles like the melding of these genres better, is something I'm not going to talk about in this video. Anyways, I hope you guys did enjoy the review. I hope this does encourage you to get into Chainsaw Man. Right? I hope my literally like 2 criticisms don't discourage you from getting into Chainsaw Man. It's 68 chapters. It is not a very like long time investment, right? If you've read One Piece, I'll just say this. If you've read One Piece and you're caught up, right, just give Chainsaw Man a try. Not because they necessarily have the same appeal, but because if you can completely dive into One Piece without any problem, the commitment of 68 chapters should not be problematic for you whatsoever. And I say that to a bunch of other manga fans as well. If you read manga, right, I heavily and I strongly recommend giving Chainsaw Man a try. I'd say if by the 5th chapter it isn't hitting for you, you could drop it. I'll say that. But give it at least 5 chapters. I would personally give it 10. But hey, you do you. You know, your time is yours. So I'd say give it 5 chapters at bare minimum before you drop it. If it's not hitting by then, it's probably just not something that's going to appeal to you in general. It is very prude in its comedy. It's very like, it's very adultish, right? I'll say that. So it does appeal to a certain audience, probably like the older demographic, like 16 to like 20, I would say is probably its main, where it hits the hardest, like in its appeal. But hey, you could be outside of that range and you still find it appealing. So I strongly recommend 5 chapters. If it doesn't work, drop it with no problems, no weight on your conscience. But please, for me, and because of how much in depth I've went on this video, give it a try. Give Chainsaw Man a try, alright? But that's it for this video. If you guys do like it and this video does well, I may do Chainsaw Man like manga reviews, or like just more manga reviews in general if you guys do enjoy it. Comment what other manga you want me to review down in the comment section below. Things that aren't so mainstream though, like obviously there's My Hero, I'll cover, Black Clover, I'll cover, things like that I'll definitely cover, but more of like these not necessarily underground manga, but just things that I don't get as much love as other things, right? Like Chainsaw Man, I think is a perfect example. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so, so you're notified for more content on the channel, because I'll definitely be getting back into the swing of things for real this time. But anyways, like I said, hope you enjoyed, and this is Anime X signing off.